Good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Tom Jean. I am one of the staff members at OHA here. I'm a Deputy State Health Officer, Deputy State Epidemiologist. I'm also one of the Senior Health Advisors for COVID-19. One of my roles at the Public Health Division is looking at a lot of doing a lot of oversight and work with various programs in chronic disease, substance use, and injury and violence prevention. So substance use is a big part of that. And I'm definitely pretty interested in psilocybin, both benefits and potential harms, and kind of just making sure that we are keeping science at the forefront of our discussions here. But very excited to be covering this topic, and very excited to be working with all of you.
Thanks, Tom. Barbara Hansen.
Hi, good afternoon. Barb Hansen. I'm an RN. I have worked in home care and hospice in Oregon for over 30 years, and I work with the Oregon Hospice and Palliative Care Association. I am interested in ensuring that accurate information is disseminated to hospice and palliative care providers, and that patients who are eligible for palliative or hospice care will have access to use psilocybin therapy if they're interested in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Ali Hamade.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I serve in the Public Health Division at the Oregon Health Authority as a Deputy State Epidemiologist. I'm also trained as a toxicologist, so we frequently look at the safety and potential harm of different substances. And psilocybin definitely fits into that category. I'm really interested in having science and social considerations at the forefront. There's probably a lot of that to be considered, in addition to any equity issues that might pop up. So I'm glad to be with all of you on this board. Looking forward to more.
Thank you, Ali. So next is Dr. Sarah Present, the local health officer position. I don't know if Dr. Present is on the call today, but any absences from board members will be excused due to the short timing of arranging this meeting. And I just want to remind everyone to please be on mute, and especially if you're not a member or an invited participant.
Andre, the admin should be able to mute people also, just a heads up.
Thanks, Sam. And our administrative executive assistant today is Nick Riley, who will be helping take minutes and help with the functioning of our virtual room here. Okay, so continuing on, Kevin Fitz.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Fitz. I'm a volunteer with a tiny little policy group called the Oregon Mental Health Consumer Association. I also serve on the Oregon Health Authority Addictions and Mental Health Planning and Management Council. I think that's the lane in which I applied to be on this council. Currently I'm a customer of the Oregon Health Authority. I'm on the Oregon Health Plan, also an individual who lives with a long-term diagnosis of schizophrenia. I'm very interested in the rollout of Measure 109. I'm always in my role attempting to push the public mental health delivery system to look at putting more options on the table. I have particular consequences with some of the toxicity around antipsychotics and antidepressants and informed consent. And I was very delighted to see Senator Steiner Hayward talk about the importance of introducing other modalities that may be less toxic and have more promise. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Glad to have you. Dr. Kimberly Golitz, and please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. I've got a pretty unpronounceable name at times, so I'll try my best, but don't worry about correcting me.
It was perfect. The last name is Golitz, and please call me Kim. I'm a clinical psychologist in Corvallis. I've been in private practice with my husband for over 30 years. I have a long-standing interest in psychedelics and altered states of consciousness, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to apply this new wave of research to improving the quality of mental health treatment. My background is in teaching and clinical training, and so I'm really very interested in setting up the system for training and assessing facilitators.
Thank you, Kim. Good to have you. Dr. Todd Cordes.
Hi, I'm Todd Cordes, and very excited to be working with all of you. I'm a general internist by training. Started off my career doing HIV medicine, and have for the last 12 years or so been focusing exclusively on addiction medicine. I also do a lot of addiction medicine research through the NIH, and was very interested in the Psilocybin Advisory Board, particularly with regard to the opportunity Measure 109 brings for Oregon to share the lessons learned and the opportunities and the knowledge gained with other people around the world who are keenly interested in our experience.
Thanks, Todd. Nice to have you too. Dr. Mason Marks.
Hi, I'm Mason Marks. I fall into the academic researcher position on the board. I'm a law professor at Gonzaga University School of Law in Spokane, Washington, and I'm a fellow at the Petrie-Flom Center for Health Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics at Harvard Law School. My academic research focuses on technology law and mental health and public health, and I teach constitutional law, health law, and drug law and policy. And my interest in psilocybin and the board is I'm drawn to the potential for psilocybin and other psychedelics to improve our mental health care and kind of fill the gap between how effective our current treatments are and what we really need.
Thank you, Mason. Good to have you. Dr. Jesse Euling.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jesse Euling. You got my name right. Nice work. I am the mycologist on the board. So I'm a professor at Oregon State University in the Department of Botany and Plant Pathology. And over here, I teach mycology and population genomics and run a research lab focused on understanding fungal diversity and evolution using genomics or DNA sequences. For the past 15 years, I have traveled the world collecting and identifying fungi and mushrooms, and am fascinated by using modern techniques like DNA sequencing and other genomics approaches to understand diversity and evolution. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the project unfolds because of the huge positive potential for change is coming, and hoping that I can fit in terms of offering insight in how to cultivate and identify fungi and avoid some of the risks of extracting psilocybin together with other products, quantifying those products, and making policies around those processes.
Thank you, Jesse. Good to have you too. Dr. Atir Abbas.
Hi, so I am a psychopharmacologist on the board. I'm a professor of behavioral neuroscience and of psychiatry at OHSU. I'm a psychiatrist and a basic scientist. So I have a longstanding interest in basic science around how psychedelics exert their effects within the brain, and I'm continuing that research in my own laboratory here. Really my interest in the board is I have a longstanding interest in psychedelics, and I would like to play a role in helping to ensure that we use a solid evidence basis for implementing 109.
Thank you, Athir. David Hart.
Good afternoon. I'm the assistant attorney in charge of the health fraud unit at the Oregon Department of Justice. So I'm the appointee of the Attorney General. I started off my career as a physical therapist. I spent 15 years practicing as a therapist in New York City. 10 of those years working with the visiting nurse service. This was in the days of AIDS, and I had hundreds of hospice patients. Changed courses, went to law school, have been with DOJ for 22 years. I'm the guy who prosecutes drug companies for off-label promotion and misrepresenting their products. I've been working in the opioid space now for about 10 years, both in have a lot to do with granting out monies for treatment. Have granted out more than $50 million for to support evidence-based medicine and treatment. So my interest is both as a patient advocate and as a consumer advocate, but also ensuring evidence-based approaches. And it's great to be with you.
Thank you, David. Nathan Ricks.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Ricks, and I'm the Deputy Director for Strategy and Policy with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. And as I'm sure you all know, a key provision of Measure 109 is tracking the use of what remains a Schedule I substance under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. And that means, similar to states regulating the use of cannabis, that we already have within the state some controls in place to track the production and distribution of cannabis and possibly psilocybin. We know that because of our experience working with the cannabis tracking system, I'm here to help share knowledge that we have specifically around tracking marijuana and how to avoid that federal intervention with you all and with the health authorities that develops a tracking system for psilocybin. I was part of the original team that set up the public policy framework and the business rules for Oregon's recreational marijuana system, including putting together the RFP for tracking, selecting a vendor. So that's the individual contribution I'll be making. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Tom Eckert.
Yeah, hi everybody. So as you may know, my late wife Cherie and I were the originators and architects and chief petitioners of Measure 109. I'm a psychotherapist by trade, now kind of transitioning into this exciting psilocybin space, wearing multiple hats, interested in building infrastructure to support the Oregon model. And I'm just like super thrilled to join this rock solid team of experts. Cherie and I always envisioned this day. And I just want to deeply thank all of you for really choosing to take a leap of faith and help create something special here. I think our work together is going to reverberate across the state, across the country, across the world, deep into the future. So I am kind of celebrating this day, really marking it as the beginning of a historic Oregon model of psychedelic care. I also want to take a moment, if I may, to just say that it's also a bittersweet day for me. You may know that my beloved wife, Cherie, died in December. We were 100% together every step of the way on this project and in life in general. And put simply, I guess what I want to say is that Cherie should really be on this board. Cherie should be on this board instead of me. She spoke of it frequently. It was just the kind of thing that would have brought out the best in her. She loved this kind of stuff. She would have been excited to meet all of you and make friends with all of you because that's the way she operated. And so it kind of saddens me that you all won't have that opportunity to see her in action because she was really, really something. If you don't mind, if I may, I'd like to ask to maybe take just 15 seconds in recognition of my lost wife and really the mother of Measure 109, the Measure 109 movement, Cherie Eckert. So if we could take just a few seconds of silence. I sincerely thank you for that. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for those comments, and welcome to the Psilocybin Advisory Board. And we hope to make Shri and your vision a viable program for the state of Oregon. Right. Angela Carter.
Hello, good afternoon, y'all. It's wonderful to meet you. My name is Angela Carter. I use they, them pronouns. My primary function for the last 10 years has been clinical direction and primary care, family medicine mostly for the queer and transgender community. I'm also bringing 10 years of medic work supporting people having psychedelic experiences at festivals and events. I'm bringing my work with Fireside Project, which is a psychedelic support and harm reduction line. And I'm bringing a decent amount of board work. I'm on the OHSU Transgender Health Program Community Advisory Board. I've been chairing for the last year. And I'm here I'm the harm reduction specialist for the board, and I'm really here to both make sure that the rules and regulations that we create do not create harmful situations for people undergoing psychedelic journeys, and also that it doesn't create barriers and more marginalization for communities who have, historically been ostracized from the psychedelic community because they are people of color or they're queer people, or, I really want to emphasize the accessibility of this therapy because it is a groundbreaking therapy that can do so much to heal, not just on an individual level, but on a cultural level. So nice to meet you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Angela. Stephanie Bars.
Hi there. My name is Steph, and I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner and a family nurse practitioner. And I live in Bend, and I've been in advanced illness management, palliative care, hospice care for the last almost 2 decades. I am very excited to be part of the board and represent people at end of life and advanced illness, and how psilocybin may play a role in managing depression and anxiety with existential distress. I'm also actively in part of a certificate program for psychedelic integration. So I'm very interested in how facilitators are trained, how we educate the public, how it rolls out in a safe way. Harm reduction is key. And I echo everything really that's been said already. I'm a public, my role is as a public voter or a public position. So I'm eager to get to know everybody and do the hard work that we're tasked to do.
Thank you, Steph. Welcome. Dr. Rachel Knox.
Thanks, Andre. Hi, everyone. Dr. Rachel Knox here. You can call me Dr. Rachel or Rachel. I am a family medicine and integrative medicine doctor by training, but I'm also an endocannabinologist and specialist in health equity. I am the now immediate past chair of our Oregon Cannabis Commission. And why psilocybin and psychedelics in general make sense for a doctor like me is because of endocannabinology. Psilocybin fits squarely within the construct of the endocannabinoid dome, which we really do believe is a biopsychosocial spiritual model of medicine that is finally ending the separation between truly traditional and holistic natural medicine and Western or conventional science and medicine. I'm here as a health equity specialist, and it will be my work along with all of you to ensure that we center holistic equity and decolonization in everything that we do. It's very important that we understand that every aspect of our work here is an equity issue, from licensing to treatment centers and access and affordability and everything else in between. we have to ensure that our recommendations here are equitable. That's the definition of social equity: fairness in policy and regulation and in the distribution of services. That makes us the social equity vehicle here. We're not creating social equity elsewhere. We are responsible for ensuring that all of our work creates holistic equity at the end of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and glad to partner again with you here at the Psilocybin Board. I'm Andre Uso, as I mentioned earlier. I am the Public Health Director's designee. Public Health Director for Oregon is Rachel Banks. I am a non-voting member. My background is in law and public health with concentration in epidemiology. I have an interest in food and drug law, and environmental health, and the impacts that those two areas have on the public's health in general. So with that, I think we have a little person I'd like to introduce from the Department of Justice, our board counsel, Shannon O'Fallon.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks, everybody. I'm Shannon O'Fallon with the Oregon Department of Justice, and I have been advising the Oregon Health Authority and the Public Health Division in particular for quite a while. I also advise OLCC's cannabis program. And so I will be providing legal advice to both the board and to OHA as they work to implement the measure and move forward in adopting rules and things like that. So it's great to meet you all.
Thanks, Shannon. Well, thank you, everybody. I think at least the first 27 minutes went pretty well. With that, I'll move along with the agenda. I just wanted to, before I do that, I just wanted to make some comments that, I will facilitate these first 2-3 meetings, and then I look to hire some staff to support the operations of the board and to develop the psilocybin program within OHA. So please bear with me for the first couple months. I'll try my best to facilitate this meeting and be a participatory board member at the same time. And then if any of you have questions about operations here at Public Health Division, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Rhodes with Governor Brown's office.
Thanks, Andre, and thanks everybody for that wonderful round of introductions. So good afternoon. On behalf of Governor Brown, I just want to first thank everybody, each and every one of you, for volunteering to serve on the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board. We're about to embark on a first in the nation adventure, and so we couldn't be more excited about this to start this with all of you. My name is Jeff Rhodes. I'm a senior policy advisor with Governor Brown. My portfolio includes Measure 110 and Measure 109 implementation, as well as addictions and recovery, OLCC, gaming and gambling, wine, and then a number of specific COVID-19 duties related to administrative rules and enforcement coordination. I also have the privilege of serving as a co-lead on the Racial Justice Council, Criminal Justice Reform, and Police Accountability Committee, which has been a fantastic experience. So as you've heard from your fellow board members during the introductions, we have amassed a wealth of talent here and experience around this table. As I moved through the interview process, what became abundantly clear is that Oregon just has this incredible amount of expertise to leverage in building this program. And I must say, it really was a privilege to speak to each and every one of you. We only got about 15 minutes for our interviews. I think every single time, I just wished we had more time because it was just so interesting to hear about your backgrounds and what you're bringing to the table for this important work. I also want to say we had an unprecedented level of interest in serving on this board. All told, received over 250 applications to serve, which I can tell you that is unprecedented. Across my portfolio, I have never seen that for any boards and commissions, and that just goes to show you the intense level of interest in this work and the intense import of this work. So one of the first tasks that you all are going to have to undertake is the creation of the internal structure of this board. Of course, that means selecting chairs and vice chairs, determining what subcommittees you're going to need to form to do this work. Measure 109 was not prescriptive in this way, and so really left it up to the board to decide how best to orient yourself. As you engage in these discussions, though, just a couple thoughts about Governor Brown's hopes for this program as she looks to the work that you're going to be undergoing over these next 2 years during the implementation period. First of all, I want to say thank you to Dr. Rachel, Dr. Knox, for the comments on centering equity in this work. It won't come as a surprise to anybody around this table that the governor has charged us with centering equity in everything that we do. And really her mantra is, it should not be just an add-on. It needs to be something that is central to the creation of our programs. And so I'm very heartened to see, to listen to Rachel's comments on that, because that is in lockstep with the way the governor would like to see this program built. You may have seen in the announcement of the board membership, the governor called for the creation of a subcommittee centered around equity and access. And so, she feels that as we build this program, it's essential that we make this cutting edge and promising treatment available to all Oregonians, regardless of circumstance. And that also we base those decisions in science. So I've had the pleasure of having excellent conversations, as I've said, with all of you over the past couple of months. One special shout out I want to give to Sam Chapman. Sam has been, as you all know, a fierce champion of the implementation of Measure 109, an essential resource to me as I've moved through the process of working with you to get the board appointed. And I just want to say a special thanks to Sam. I know he's following me after my comments, but thank you, Sam, for all of your work and tireless efforts, and to Tom as well. And thank you for your wonderful comments about your late wife. Very powerful. Lastly, I just want to say I'm here as a resource from the governor's standpoint as you continue through this all important work. So please feel free to reach out to me anytime with questions or concerns related to the governor's perspective, the governor's office perspective on your work. But that being said, I mean, we have an amazing resource with Andre, and you'll be in more than capable hands with him running the show here. So that's all I've got for my opening comments. I'm happy to take any questions that folks might have for the governor's office. Andre, if that works for the schedule, otherwise we can just move along with whatever makes sense to you. But thanks for having me today, and it's really great to see all of you on Zoom.
Hi, Jeff. Sure. We have a few minutes for questions from the members.
You were talking about the subcommittees. We're going to get back to that later in the day, right? Have a more robust discussion around subcommittees.
Hi, Tom. This is Andre. Yeah, we do have that on the agenda, and we will take a significant amount of time to discuss that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Andre, there was a question here that came in the chat from Matthew Hicks concerning the naturopathic position. Great question. We do have some NDs on the board currently. Angela just chimed in. Thank you, Angela. Angela is a naturopath and ND, but also we're going to be looking to fill that position. The reason why we're taking a little bit more time is that the governor
I think we might have lost Jeff there.
Hi, Jeff. I think we lost you. And I would say anyone that's having some broadband issues with the technology, if you close out your video, you should increase your broadband for the microphone.
Hey, I got kicked off, Andre. I'm sorry, but I'm back now.
Thanks, Jeff. I think you were explaining filling the naturopath position, and then we lost your microphone at that point.
I'll just distill the comments again. Really, what it comes down to is that we do have some NDs on the board currently, and we're seeking to fill that dedicated position with somebody that brings geographic diversity to the table right now. So we're in the process of doing that, and hope to have somebody official in that spot coming for the next meeting.
Thanks, Jeff. Just some reminders for housekeeping as we try to figure out virtual public meetings. If you are not a member, please do not use the chat function. We'll try to find a way to disable a chat function. And then we do not have public comment for this meeting, but it is my intention to have public comment periods at the end of the monthly meetings. So, you know, I welcome the public. I'm glad that you guys are viewing, and I would like to get a chance for a public comment period in future meetings. So just bear with us. And then for members, let's try to limit the chat function to sharing resources. Chats in virtual meetings are part of public meetings, so it's going to be hard to make sure all that stuff is in the minutes and transcribed. So just a reminder to try to limit our use of chat to when it's absolutely necessary. All right, thank you. Thanks, Jeff, for those comments. And next on our agenda, I'll turn it over to Sam Chapman, Campaign Manager for Measure 109.
Thanks, Andre. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Sam Chapman. I use he, him pronouns. I was the campaign manager for Measure 109. And now I serve as the executive director of the Healing Advocacy Fund, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a second, along with an overview about Measure 109, what it does and what it doesn't do as a primer. But before I do, I actually, Andre, if it's okay with you, I want to yield about a minute or two to actually kick it back to Tom, just for an outset, to give us a little bit of a deeper glimpse into the spirit and the intent of Measure 109 and the vision that Tom and Shuri had created, which I think is an important table setting agenda item for the next 2 years of rule setting. So if that's okay, I'd like to kick it over to Tom just for a brief. Okay, over to you, Tom.
Sure, Sam.
Hey, yeah, thank you. I'd love to. So just a bit about the inspirations behind Measure 109 as a starting point. Obviously, we wanted to, end the 50-year unscientific prohibition of psychedelic therapy, which in my mind was long overdue, and we thank Oregon voters for that. But I also want to say that Shuri and I were equally inspired to think about how we integrate psychedelics back into the culture. So we saw the ballot initiative as kind of a perfect tool to carve out a space for psilocybin therapy, and to do so in a way that kind of puts it on its own foundation, right? And I think that's important because the existing frames of reference, whether FDA-driven medicalization on one side or kind of cannabis-style legalization on the other side, really didn't fit this unique modality in my mind and in Shuri's mind. So we really wanted to carve out a framework that kind of fits the offering, something which hadn't really been attempted, at least in modern times here in the West. So right now that framework exists in broad strokes in the form of legislation that we passed. And while I know Measure 109 is the name that's fresh in our minds, I actually think about it as the Oregon model of psychedelic care, which we're going to all work on defining. And of course, when you advance a specific model, you assume that it's based on essential principles or kind of an underlying theory or even a belief structure that more or less defines that model. So in that vein, I just want to quickly share a few principles that come to my mind with regard to the Oregon model. And the first is access. The Oregon model is an access model. We believe anyone who can safely benefit should be able to access these services. And therefore, it's not strictly a medical model in the sense that access isn't exclusively based on prescriptions or qualifying psychiatric or medical diagnoses. And similarly, the Oregon model is essentially based on a belief that psilocybin is not exactly a pharmaceutical drug. It shouldn't necessarily be regulated like it's some new pill that's created in a lab with unknown side effects. So in that sense, we kind of respect the deep history and knowledge of psychedelic use, plant medicine ceremony dating back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So yeah, and I also really take pride in the Oregon model as being rational. You know, it recognizes risk. At the same time, it doesn't bend to stigma. It's careful, it embraces science and rigor, it embraces safety and practice and ethical standards. It embraces training models that are specific to psilocybin facilitation, which in many ways is its own discipline. And it ultimately supports a healthy community-based marketplace while kind of protecting against more unhealthy agendas, big corporate profit motives that tend to undermine access and quality of care. And the kind of last thing I want to say is that the Oregon model is about the human being. You know, it's not a coincidence that we see this kind of what I call transdiagnostic efficacy in the research. And that's because I think that, you know, the psilocybin experience itself is what affects change and integration afterwards. And so this is an individual experience, and that's the agent of change. And that's why this is a deeply therapeutic, humanistic, and person-centered model. So I'm really excited to work with you all on creating that kind of container. And I'll yield back to Sam and get a little deeper into it.
All right, thanks for that, Tom. Really appreciate it. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. Are people able to see that first slide? Okay. So again, my name is Sam Chapman, and I'm gonna give a little bit of a summary here on Measure 109 and the next steps and some of the board's function and duties. And so I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in here to this presentation. So who is the Healing Advocacy Fund? We are a nonprofit, and our mission is to protect the intent and the spirit of Measure 109 as passed by Oregon voters to ensure that psilocybin therapy is affordable, accessible, and equitable for all who stand to benefit, while simultaneously keeping client safety and facilitator training top of mind. And so why psilocybin therapy? So I don't think at this point in time, it's a big surprise to know that, you know, the entire country has been suffering from a mental health crisis for a very long time. And now with the coronavirus epidemic, you know, 1 in 3 people are saying they're experiencing some type of symptom, you know, as a result of the coronavirus. And unfortunately here in Oregon, even prior to the pandemic, Oregon has been suffering from one of the most severe mental health crises in the country. And so there is a very timely piece to the work that we're doing here in Oregon. Not only has applications here in Oregon, but we'll have applications in other states and other countries to come as we continue to look to new tools in the toolbox for being able to help people who are suffering, as well as people who are generally well indeed. So the psilocybin research, we're going to do a lot more justice to this than I'm going to do in this one slide, but the research is really speaking for itself right now. You know, we've seen many, many rigorous studies over the past decades come out of leading medical institutions such as Johns Hopkins, UCLA, NYU, that are showing that psilocybin therapy shows real promise, and even shows so much promise that the FDA has granted psilocybin therapy a breakthrough therapy designation, meaning that it demonstrates substantial improvement above and beyond what is currently available and really shows promise for people where the current alternatives simply may not be working. And again, I wanted to highlight one thing from a New York Times article that you may or may not have seen by Ezra Klein that was published last week. Specifically, Ezra says the Oregon psilocybin therapy model is based on the idea that psilocybin has the potential to change our lives for the good, whether we are sick or well. And so it's worth investing in the framework and safeguards so that it can be used safely and productively. I think that does a really good job of encapsulating the need to help those who are suffering and help those who may not be diagnosed or that are just looking for other opportunities to you know, be providing new options moving forward. So really quickly, Measure 109 recap here. I've got a very short 90-second visual for you. In the life of Zoom, we like to try and keep this interactive if we can. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of an animation that really does a good job of showing what Measure 109 does and does not do.
Almost all of us in Oregon have a friend or neighbor who struggles with mental health challenges. These are everyday problems, even before the pandemic and recession. Depression, anxiety, addiction. Too many Oregonians have spent years moving from medication to medication and doctor to doctor with little relief for feelings of severe depression or anxiety. We need other options. Those other options may soon be available. There's new research being conducted on therapy using psilocybin, a plant medicine. It's being studied for mental health benefits now at New York University, Johns Hopkins University, UCLA. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration found that it's a, quote, breakthrough therapy, giving a green light to path-breaking research. Psilocybin therapy would be regulated, permitted only in licensed offices, and not legalized for recreational use. There would be a controlled framework with strict safeguards in place. It takes place with a licensed and trained facilitator after a thorough evaluation and screening process. In a preparation session in the days before, you discuss the details of the day and what to expect from the session itself. On the day of the treatment, the client takes the psilocybin and experiences the effects, always with guidance and supervision. After the session ends, in an integration session in the days after, the client returns to discuss the experience, interpret what happened, and how to put it to good use in the future. Pioneering research studies show psilocybin therapy may help people break troublesome mental patterns and find new ways to cope with past traumas and difficulties. And it helps them do so without resorting to high daily doses of pharmaceuticals with all kinds of side effects. People are living happier lives. It's a new approach, worth considering.
All right. So just to recap here on some of the things that Measure 109 does, obviously establishes a regulatory framework within the Oregon Health Authority. It clearly establishes the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, which we have here today, and imposes a 2-year development period before initial licenses are granted. Again, the work that all of you are going to be doing, and requires the establishment of training and licensure system for psilocybin facilitators, manufacturers, and testing labs, and requires the establishment of a tracking system for psilocybin products. And Andre, I'm just realizing that one thing I did not do at the outset of this presentation that I'll do now, better late than never, is to say that this slideshow specifically does not represent the views or opinions of the Oregon Health Authority, simply of the Healing Advocacy Fund. Sorry, I didn't get in at the very beginning, but there it is for you. Also, just as important as what Measure 109 does do, this is what Measure 109 does not allow. As the video stated, there are no retail sales that will occur of psilocybin. There will be no off-site consumption, possession, or cultivation of psilocybin outside of the licensed and regulated context. There will be no branding or advertising of psilocybin products. You're simply not ever going to drive down I-5 and see advertisements for mushrooms. There'll be no unregulated or untracked psilocybin production, delivery, or inventory. And of course, no therapy centers near schools and no access for minors. Again, as illustrated in the video, there's 3 main pillars that make up the psilocybin services modality. The first is a preparation session. This is where informed consent with a healthy and safety warning and screening that will include a standardized risk assessment, contraindication screening, and a mental health review, goodness of fit assessment. Secondarily, there'll be the psilocybin therapy itself, which again must occur at a licensed service center. It must occur in the presence of a facilitator throughout the entire process, and the facilitator must certify the completion for the client to be able to leave. And last but certainly not least is the integration session, which must be offered by a facilitator after the completion of the psilocybin session itself. Now, moving into just some of the campaign lessons for implementation. Some of these are going to be very important just from an educational standpoint, right? One of the things that we really learned during the campaign was that a lot of people simply were not that familiar, if at all, with psilocybin. And so what we learned throughout the campaign, in which at the end of the day really contributed to our overall success, and I think will continue to be able to contribute to the success within the next 2 years for the Psilocybin Advisory Board and the Oregon Health Authority to make the most affordable, accessible, equitable psilocybin therapy program possible, is to continue to address and be ready to respond and provide answers to the following questions. We know that people not only support this program, but are very interested in its potential by answering the following questions of what psilocybin is, what the research says, what the measure does, and again, sometimes more importantly, what the measure does not do. And last but certainly not least, who stands to benefit from having access to psilocybin therapy, right? I think one of the most common quotes from Tom throughout the campaign was, this is not a panacea. We're not pretending that this is for everyone, but we certainly know that there is a large population of people that stand to benefit from having the option for accessing psilocybin therapy where current alternatives may have fallen short. And so again, this just goes to show where we ended up, you know, in terms of polling and the education line. And I think it really goes to show that, you know, when we really started putting pedal to the metal in our education efforts in October in 2019, you know, and we really started to see that incline over the rest of the 2020, and of course, throughout to the end of the year to end up at 56%. And you may be wondering what drove those yes voters. We actually did some post-campaign polling that really showed that the science and research that shows psilocybin offers new hope for being able to help treat common mental health conditions was by far and large the #1 thing that drove folks. And I think we all have different folks that, you know, supported for one reason or another, but I think the promise that psilocybin therapy shows is a new tool in the tool belt for combating mental health and just helping people in general throughout everything that people are going through these days is one of the reasons that people really drove the yes support home. Again, progress in education. This is where the campaign is essentially handing the ball off to the Psilocybin Advisory Board, the Oregon Health Authority, and other organizations and entities throughout the state, and continuing to provide education and a baseline for understanding. Again, one of the first homework assignments the Psilocybin Advisory Board is going to have is to compile all of the available current research and make that available for public review and digestion. And so as you can see here, from the beginning of October 2020 through Election Day, we made significant gains in education, from people just being familiar with psilocybin to people being understanding that psilocybin may have real promise for people in treating mental health conditions, to the fact that the science is really starting to resonate with people, that they trust it, that they understand that the prestigious institutions that have been working and researching psilocybin therapy for decades really is starting to resonate. And of course, that Measure 109 is a regulated and supervised and licensed program that really helps people ensure that this program is going to be safe and that they can feel good supporting it and participating in it moving forward. Again, I think this is also a very interesting demographic and really shows the broad support for Measure 109. You know, I can tell you that we collected signatures during the initiative phase from people in over 300 cities in the state of Oregon. I honestly didn't know there were that many cities in the state, but there certainly are. And the support continues to grow. And I think we will continue to see the support grow in all of these different counties as we continue to do our work to educate the public and create the best program possible. Now, moving into implementation, in my mind, and I think in a lot of your minds, and I think Tom hit on this, Dr. Knox hit on this, Jeff hit on this from the governor's office, it's worth repeating over and over and over again. I personally believe that these are the 3 keys to successful implementation. First, affordability, ensuring that the cost of services remain affordable for those who stand to benefit, especially for those who have been disproportionately impacted by the failed war on drugs, COVID-19, or have little to no access to current healthcare services. It's not lost on us, and I don't think it's lost on anyone on this advisory board, that we have a lot of lessons not too far in our past that we can look at, that we can own from some of our failures, and that we can leverage into the future in creating a program that truly is affordable for everyone that stands to benefit. Second is accessibility. You know, there's a geographic region to this, right? And this really means ensuring that we're educating cities and counties on the benefits of allowing these services to exist in their own communities. And last, but certainly not least, is equitable access. And that's ensuring that our BIPOC communities are centered in the development of equitable rules, regulations, services, and licensing. And of course, we're coming to the end of the slide here, the duties of the board, collecting existing studies, recommending guidelines for serving clients and licensing facilitators, service centers, et cetera, establishing public safety standards, establishing professional conduct, certification, and training requirements, developing a long-term strategic plan for ensuring that psilocybin services will be accessible and affordable therapeutic option, monitor and study federal law and attempt to work with federal government agencies, and establishing subcommittees, which is something that you're going to get into later in this meeting. And last but not least, here's the statutory implementation timeline. These are the specific timeline and deadlines that are called out within the measure that I think are going to be incredibly important for everyone involved to really understand. And I really want to point out what is at the end of this rulemaking period here in January 2023, that the intent and spirit of this measure really envisions services being available by 2023. And so I think it's really important for people to realize that if we're going to hit that final timeline, there's some additional timelines that we're going to need to consider throughout the 2-year rulemaking process. And I think one of the most important that I'm sure is going to be brought up at some point in this meeting and future meetings to come is the need to ensure that we have trained and certified enough facilitators to be able to offer those services by 2023. And with that, I will yield back to Andre.
Thanks, Sam. And I guess what I can do now is just open it up for questions from members of SAM. So take a few minutes if any of you all have questions for Sam.
Well, this is Todd. I'll jump in. Sam, thank you for the presentation. One of the things that I was curious about was how bound the board is to the timeline. Is this something we can't alter? And I'm particularly concerned about the June 30th deadline for a rigorous review of the existing scientific literature. That's almost an unprecedented pace, as well as some of the other things that fall under the category of research. And I'm wondering if some of our tasks can't be done in parallel, simultaneously, working on educational guidelines as we're maybe taking an additional month or two to do a rigorous scientific review.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. I'll take an initial crack, and I'll be happy to hand it back over to Andre as well to add anything additionally. Those timelines are indeed included in the measure. So they are statutory requirements that are essentially part of the law, right? And so I think you're absolutely right to call this out as something that the board is going to need to immediately start to address is, based on our timelines, how do we work these backwards, and what do we need to do now to set ourselves up for success in order to meet those timelines? I think, as it's been discussed already, and it's been shown that it's on the agenda, the creation of subcommittees is one of the biggest ways in which I think that can happen. I think that this board is incredibly capable and feels like a working board in a lot of ways. And I think, with all this expertise, it's only to Oregon's benefit to be able to continue to bring in and utilize the capacity and the expertise that exists on this board, in addition to the capacity and expertise that may exist outside of this board. And I think we may see some of that within subcommittees as well. And so with that, Andre, I'll kick it back over to you to see if you wanted to add things to that as well.
Thanks, Sam. Good question, Todd. It's a ballot measure, so I think the only people that are going to be able to change it are the Oregon legislature at this point. So we are committed to those timelines, and we can talk about the parameters around the first assignment to publish and distribute the publicly available literature on psilocybin. And I think that we can as a board, come to an agreement on what that is probably going to look like by June, and then by July for OHA to make that available for the public viewing. So it's certainly a big task. I know the agency is engaged in the literature review and legislative directed literature review last year, and it did take quite a bit of time. So I share your concerns, but we're going to make a good faith effort to meet the deadlines in law. Okay, I would like to pause and recognize an additional member, Dr. Sarah Present. Sarah, if you want to introduce yourself, kind of mention the role that you're in here on the board, and maybe 30 seconds or so on your interest in psilocybin and participating on the board.
Thank you, Andre, and I'm sorry I'm late. I have a competing needs today, so I will potentially be popping in and out a few times, but I wanted to be able to say hello and to hear at least some of the early
work of this first board meeting. I'm really excited to represent our local health officers on the Psilocybin Advisory Board. So I am the public health officer for Clackamas County. I've also worked in the past as a public health officer for Columbia County and then 2 small counties in the state of Washington. So I have some understanding of local public health in small and large counties. And like I said, I currently work in Clackamas. I'm also a family medicine provider at the Federally Qualified Health Center in Clackamas County. I provide medication-assisted therapy as part of my primary care practice, and I do a lot of women's health. So I'm full spectrum primary care in addition to public health. I've been a health officer for 7-8 years, somewhere around there. I sat on our county's sort of time, place, and manner around cannabis commission. And so I have some kind of local public health knowledge around the regulatory aspects of creative laws that Oregon has, and how that kind of plays down to the local levels. In addition, as a primary care provider, I have just a lot of interest in the therapeutic aspects of this and how to ensure that the benefits get to the people in our community that can be in most need of it. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you all. Thanks, Sarah. Welcome. All right, everybody. I think on our agenda we have a 5-minute break. I'm going to honor that for a little bio break, coffee, tea, water, what have you. I have 2:02, so I'll reconvene the meeting at 2:07 p.m. Okay, I'm going to reconvene the Psilocybin Advisory Board meeting. David, your view of the outdoors is making me jealous. It's a sunny spring day in Oregon. We're all very lucky. All right, just little reminders on housekeeping issues. Please remain on mute if you're not speaking. I'll be facilitating the meeting, so I'll be looking for lighting up of the boxes or people coming off mute. If they want to ask a question or make a comment, you can always just start talking too. We're not going to be too formal in these first couple meetings. Just a reminder to the public that please keep yourselves on mute, and please do not use the chat function, and for members to use the chat function unless absolutely necessary. And again, I just wanted to apologize. We do not have a public comment period for the end of this meeting today, but I do want to make public comment periods available at future meetings. And then I also want to state that any rulemaking that the agency moves forward with based on recommendations and advice from the board will be according to the Oregon Administrative Procedures Act, which will always provide public comment period for any proposed rules. So I just want to make sure that the public understands that their voice will be heard and will be invited and welcomed when we do go into rulemaking. All right, so I think next agenda is just kind of an update for me. I mentioned some of these issues a little earlier in our meeting, but we do have a budget that's proposed within the governor's budget that will be up for vote this session to fund the program and the board during this 2-year development period. And that means that most of the hiring for the program is going to start after June 30th of this year. It's just the start of the fiscal biennium for the state of Oregon. I do have some position authority to get hiring started now, and I'll do that in earnest this month, to at least get hiring started on a manager for the program and for a couple staff to help administer the operations of the board. We're going through a pretty busy legislative session right now, and the board is one of several programs in my portfolio. So just kind of bear with me as we deal with limited resources here at a state public health agency as we're coming out of a once-in-a-generation pandemic. So I appreciate the grace, and I'll be working hard for you all and for the board to get this program implemented over the next 2 years. So next on our agenda, I'm not too stuck on the order here. I just kind of listed some activities that I wanted to discuss today. I just want a little healthy mix of kind of substantive work that we're going to be doing, the interesting stuff, versus the kind of administrative functions of running a board, like reviewing bylaws and electing chairs and such. So if anyone doesn't have any objections, I'll keep the agenda in this order, kind of saving the interesting stuff for last, and we'll try to get through the less interesting, more administrative functions of setting up an advisory board. All right, here I'm seeing some nodding of heads, so I'll take that as consensus. If you all could kindly look at some draft bylaws that were provided in the invite and emailed to you yesterday, I will bring those up myself and try to share my screen with you. Okay, is everyone seeing a Word document, draft, watermark? Hopefully not my Outlook calendar. All right, well, Dr. Knox, you'll recognize this template of these bylaws as they're used for the Oregon Cannabis Commission. Just basic bylaws in running an advisory board. Please forgive any formatting issues. We'll get that all cleaned up by subsequent meetings. And I just wanted to briefly go over the basic articles of bylaws, open it up for questions or recommendations on additions or edits. Before I do that, I just want to make a note that on voting members, since this is important for Dr. Jane and I, it's not in the version that I sent you last night, but I did start making some changes here to voting members. There should be an edit under Article 5, number 5F, flat commissioner. That's based on the Cannabis Commission, so that's deleted. The votes will be based upon majority of a quorum. And then members described in Article 1, 1A through C are non-voting members. However, I propose that non-voting members may make or second a motion. So we're actually getting to the business of the board and making motions on issues of discussion and motions for voting. I would propose that Tom and I can make these motions, but we'll abstain from any sort of voting that would count to a board decision. If anyone has any concerns or questions about that, please feel free to speak up.
I have a different question about the voting language. So if you want to wait and see if anybody has questions about the issue you just raised, that's fine. My question about voting is whether we need to address whether electronic voting in between meetings would be allowed. Does that need to be stated in the bylaws?
So I don't know if Shannon is on the line and if she wants to jump in, but I think that might be possible. But from my knowledge of public boards, is that all the business of the board needs to be made public, and that the voting would be limited to during the meeting. But I could be wrong. I think we could have voting by email if that's, I think we've done that in the past. It just means that those votes and those emails, of course, with all their emails in state are subject to public records laws. Okay, so just a real quick kind of overview of the bylaws. We of course have got the formal name of the board, the authority and role and responsibilities. There'll be some edits here whenever the law becomes codified, so we're not just referencing the ballot measure itself. I've made some notes where that would occur. Article 2, Section 2 would be roles and responsibilities. These come straight out of the ballot measure. Might be a little paraphrased, something I learned in law school you should never do. Don't paraphrase a statute, but for the purposes of our bylaws, I think we'll all get the point on what the roles and responsibilities of the board are. Article 3 is about members. So composition, straight out of the ballot measure here. Once again, we have our non-voting ex officio members, and then we list all of the 14 to 16 members that are appointed by the governor. Terms of office, once again, straight out of the ballot measure, period of 4 years. I'll go through this to make sure that it's accurate. Certain things that I'm not sure if accurate if members are eligible for reappointment. I'll have to look at the ballot measure itself and confer with council on that. Removal of members, we all work at the pleasure of the governor, so by how we're going to be removed. Duties and responsibilities. And this envisions, of course, a role for the newly formed psilocybin services section and whoever will be filling that role. And envisions a chair and a vice chair as the officers. Since I don't think that we have treasury issues, these are going to be funds that are supported by the Oregon Health Authority. I don't think we have to worry about that too much. From time to time, I do ask our staff to come and talk about our budget. I don't think it'll be an issue for the first year or so, but I'm always happy to discuss budget at future meetings to see what funds are available for implementing the measure. And then we have some duties and responsibilities of the chairperson, vice chairperson. Article 5, the conduct of meetings and public records. Of course, we're always operating under Oregon Public Meetings Law, and our records are public records and available to the public. A majority of the voting members will constitute a quorum, so even if we have a majority of all members except for Tom and I, then whether we can conduct meetings will be dependent on a majority of the voting members. No proxy voting, no secret balloting. We all need to know who voted for what. We'll either do that with hand raising or stating our name and saying aye or nay. Of course, I just talked about the non-voting members and their ability to make motions. Special meetings, we can call special meetings if need by the chair and vice chair. Committees, be an important discussion today and probably into the next meeting as well, as formation of committees, selection of committees and appointments of subcommittee members. Of course, we'll have to adopt and possibly amend these bylaws that we're talking about today. Bylaws would need to be amended by a 2/3 vote, so not just the majority of the quorum. And then, of course, we'd have to notice any amendment in the bylaws and the agenda. Travel reimbursement. it's available. I don't see us traveling for board meetings in the immediate future. I'm hoping that the latter half of 2021 and into 2022 is a better year for our safety and health. And then we can discuss, if we would like to hold meetings in Portland or other parts of the state. And I think that's useful when we get back to more normal times. It affords people to see us in person and ask questions, of the public to ask questions of us in person. And then ethical conduct and conflict of interest. Of course, we're acting in accordance with ethical conduct of board members under Oregon law. And we'll have probably some additional discussion and homework on all the training on ethics and board members that are required of the state of Oregon and OHA, but nothing today, fortunately. There is a provision here. I just want to back up under subcommittees that it's only allowed 4 meetings per year for subcommittee members to be reimbursed. We do allow for non-members to be part of subcommittees. I don't know where this 4 meetings limitation comes from. I'll have to do a little bit more research since this is coming off of another template. But that's the bylaws in a nutshell. I would be happy to take any suggested edits or changes, additions at this time. I'll make some notes in the comment section, and then I'll make sure that these are provided in a different draft for our next meeting. And then once we have a chair and a vice chair, we can vote on adopting these bylaws. And then after this meeting, acting in my non-member role, you can send me any changes, as the administrator of the public of the center here in public health. Send them directly to my email if you have any additions or edits after the meeting, and I'd be happy to incorporate those in a draft for discussion at the next meeting. I see Angela has a question, so I'll yield to you.
Thank you. I have 2 potential suggestions for edits. One, at the end of our 4 years, if our terms all end at once, we run the risk of a major extinction of institutional knowledge, with all of the board members leaving and new members joining. I wonder if there might be a way for some people to, from the first cohort, trickle out more gradually so that institutional knowledge is retained for the next cohort. So that was one thought that I had. The other thought is, and this is just a suggestion, but co-chair instead of chair and vice chair could potentially provide a more collaborative participation. And it's, in my experience working on boards, having co-chair roles tends to, the chairs each have sort of a designated set of things that they're working on, but it allows for a lot more oversight in more of an egalitarian sort of way. So just 2 suggestions. I'll leave off there.
Thanks. I'm trying to recognize people and take myself off mute at the same time. It's like walking and chewing gum at the same time for me. Dr. Knox.
Thanks, Andre. I'll lower my hand. Yeah, I know you're going to take a look again at the subcommittees. As you know, the Cannabis Commission, we really exponentially increased our productivity once we created our 4 subcommittees, which came together on a monthly basis in between meetings that we had on a quarterly cadence. So I would, petition that meetings for subcommittees are held as frequently as needed to get the work done to support the advisory board.
Mason.
Thanks. This is probably something we can discuss later as well, but I just wanted to comment on the holding meetings in person and maybe just throw out the idea of holding meetings virtually, either indefinitely or retaining an option to attend remotely, just because it's, makes things more accessible for people. It keeps costs down. It's more environmentally friendly, and we might have higher attendance as well generally, but just wanted to throw that out there for further thought.
All right, thanks all.
Yeah, hi, Kevin Fitz here. I sent you to your individual email a comment I had about OHA policy and unpaid volunteers participating in formal council work. So hopefully you'll review that and give me some feedback on it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I'll take a look at that. And any other
Hey,
comments?
Andre, quick comment
Hey,
from, when I reviewed last night, I noticed in the section regarding public comments or comments to the press, it said that you could comment in your, quote, official capacity. Whenever I do talks, I always make the point that I'm commenting on a personal capacity, not on behalf of the Attorney General. I don't know if you meant personal, but if you didn't, could you add that?
And David, is that mentioned in our bylaws somewhere?
Yeah, I thought it was. I read it last night, but there was, I believe, a section on responding to press inquiries, and it said basically you can't, except one can talk in one's official capacity. I guess that meant in one's non-board member official capacity, but I think many of us talk in our individual capacity when we're commenting or speaking publicly. Perhaps I conflated it with a different document, but I thought it was in this one.
Mm-hmm.
No, it is. It's Article 3, number 4, because I have a question about that section also. So sorry, Article 3, but number 4, and then B is where my question is. There it is, under duties.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And Barb, go ahead with your question.
So my question is it just members of the press that, we should notify the chair about? Because I've had multiple contacts, and maybe other members of the advisory board have as well. For example, an attorney has contacted me several times about the right to try law and how it intersects with the psilocybin, ballot measure 109. And the other thing, so is it just the press, or could it potentially be others? And then I think it would make the bylaws clear if we designated how that notification should occur, or just suggest, for example, email, phone call, text message, post-it note, just how that should occur, just to clarify.
I'm sorry, Bob. Your example of being contacted by an attorney, what was the context for that?
It was trying to assert and get an opinion from me about whether someone could use psilocybin under the right to try law. I don't know. There's a group in Washington State who's also working on this, and I'm not an attorney, and because a physician contacted me and wanted to know if a friend of hers could access psilocybin, and I said, well, there's a 2-year development period. There won't be any psilocybin service centers until 2023, And then I think she knows, this attorney who then said, oh, but wait, there's the right to try law that people should be able to access psilocybin. And I just thought, wow, this is beyond my scope at this point.
Yeah, I think we can defer those questions to our DOJ counsel if you do receive them. So notifying the agency, me, or the future section manager if you do get those legal questions. And I would hope that attorneys aren't asking individual members for their legal opinions. Probably not a very good attorney if they're doing that. But yes, we'll include media and legal type questions and how they're referred to our board counsel.
And my point, if you see where it says noted to be in their official capacity rather than, I would say, official capacity or personal, official or personal capacity.
So David, are you getting at that we should just be clear that we're not speaking for the board?
Correct.
Answer those.
Yeah, so as I said, I speak at conferences regularly, and I always make clear that it's in a personal capacity, not in my official capacity as an assistant attorney general. Here, it says specifically, only if it is specifically noted to be in their official capacity rather than an OPAB position. I actually don't think official is necessary. It doesn't bother me, but I want to make clear that it includes personal. We all get to speak our mind personally despite participating in this board, right?
I think that clause might be very helpful also in responding to short fused requests. On this and other subjects, when I get requests, it's typically 24 hours, maybe 48, that somebody's up against the press deadline.
So I apologize if my notes don't make sense to other people, but they'll make sense to me later.
So just so I'm clear, essentially this is asking us to get in the habit of identifying that we're speaking in a personal capacity every time we're talking to the media, because I get a lot of inquiries.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this, as it's with the edits, this looks good to me. I think in the case where we want the board to speak in an official capacity, that's not going to be just a media contacting an individual member, unless we designate a spokesperson, right? And then that spokesperson has to check with the board and has to, be representing what the board's full opinion is. So,
right.
Just making that clear.
And specifically, it's good practice to identify that. Like, be active about identifying that you're not speaking for the board, because we don't want things showing up in the media that we didn't make that clear, and now it's said that board member said this, and then there's confusion around if that's reflecting the board.
Yeah, that's correct. So, I mean, for example, you'd say, I, Tom Eckert, applying in my capacity as a psychotherapist or chief petitioner of Measure 109, I think this. And I'm not representing the views of the Oregon Health Authority or the Psilocybin Advisory Board.
Gotcha.
Any other comments or questions? And like I said, you can always email me your suggestions, for the record, in my agency capacity, not in my board member capacity, and I'll include those, and then we'll bring these bylaws back for discussion at the next meeting, and it usually takes a couple meetings to adopt and vote on the bylaws. Okay, so I think this is probably going to be the most awkward part of our meeting today. But I don't know if we want to discuss nominations for a chair and a vice chair. I know that Angela discussed the possibility of co-chairs, which I'm certainly open to. The structure is open to us to determine. So what I will do is I'll make a motion to open discussion on chair, vice chair, co-chairs, and then I'll whenever we've spoken about that enough, I'll close that motion, and then I'll open another motion to maybe to some nominations.
Can I second Angela's recommendation for co-chairs as opposed to vice and whatnot?
So we have a second for the motion for co-chairs. I'm not going to stick to Robert's rules very strictly here, but I'll try to have some kind of order to our conversation so we're not all getting lost.
So this is open discussion around chairs. I'm new to boards like this, so I would love for someone to give kind of layman's scope of what the function and work of the chairs looks like on an ongoing basis.
Sure.
Jump in here, Andre.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Rachel. You're very well versed at doing that.
Right on. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of work behind the scenes. Oregon Cannabis Commission only met quarterly, but we also had monthly subcommittee meetings, and we had 3 and then now 4 subcommittees. And I was very blessed to have a very committed and capable vice chair as well, who honestly I think should have been, elevated to a legitimate co-chair with me, because we did share quite a bit of the responsibility in, creating our agendas and communicating with OHA, communicating with legislators, communicating with OLCC. So a lot of good work has to happen behind the scene. And I just think it would have been more honoring to call him a co-chair for one. And then for 2, codifying a shared responsibility, I think is important for not just that co-chair or vice chair, but also the chair. So I'm in support of that change too.
So I would just like to offer maybe a little counter argument or devil's advocate to having co-chairs rather than a chair and vice chair format, is that the chair really works on the agenda with the agency and setting that agenda, and has a lot of privilege and prerogative in setting that agenda. And if you have co-chairs, then there's a potential for disagreement between 2 people. And then it's hard to have a tiebreaker when you have 1 versus 1. And that usually then falls to the agency, and then the agency has to make a difficult decision that might not be popular for any of the members. So I would just say that that's kind of a perspective on not having co-chairs and having the chair vice chair format.
Yeah, and quickly in response to that, Andre, I, as chair for a moment, was the only one in those meetings, but I was vice chair on the Oregon Cannabis Commission before I became chair. That first year, I had no idea what was going on and what conversations our chair at that time were having with OHA and the governor's office. And there was a meeting where our chair did not show up, and running that meeting fell onto me, and I had no idea where to pick up and where to direct us. And so pretty quickly after I became chair, I pulled the vice chair into those agenda setting meetings. And, we had never disagreed. So I think, we had a chair and vice chair on the Cannabis Commission that worked very well together. We're of a similar mind as well. Not to say that disagreements couldn't happen. I think we would have to be prepared for that. But the likelihood of that happening, I think, might be a little more rare. But continuity is going to be very important. And I just remember what it felt like being that vice chair, just utterly unequipped to pick up the baton when our chair was not available, and when she ultimately resigned from the commission.
Thanks for those comments, Rachel. So I would say, yes, the vice chair should be involved in all discussions with the agency on setting the agenda and how the meetings are going to be operated. And then ultimately in that structure, you do have that cooperation and collaboration, but it's the privilege of the chair to make that ultimate decision.
I guess I'd say something maybe in favor of having co-chairs, just given the incredible amount of work we have before us in very short amount of time. It might make sense, at least for the first year, to have co-chairs, and that can always be changed in the future when things level off a little bit, I guess would be my perspective on that.
This is Tom. I guess I would just agree with Andre that it's nice to have somebody designated. So even if you had the chair and vice chair, the understanding, it's kind of like a captain and first officer on a plane. They both are fully qualified to fly that plane, but ultimately in those rare situations where one person is against the other and has to make a decision, the captain has the final authority. So I don't know. I do think it's important to have that delineated, but with the understanding that both parties should be playing basically an equal role in the work behind the scenes, and also both could be able to lead the subcommittee or whatever their duty may be.
Has anyone served on a board where there was a chair or vice chair that you thought worked well?
Yeah, hi, it's Advisory Council, a legislative formed committee that advises Pat chairs and a chair, and then all our subcommittees have 2 co-chairs of our subcommittees, and we have 3 policy committees and then 1 nuts and bolts development and executive committee.
Thanks, Kevin. Todd, I would give an example of going back to my Board of Medicine days in Florida, is that we did have a situation where we had pretty competitive election for a chair of the Oregon Medical Board. And the decision was that one would be chair for the first 6 months of the year and the other would be the chair for the last 6 months of the year. It wasn't a fun year because of personalities involved in the chair and vice chair. But it's a possibility, and it's something that, we could be open to doing and having that set up as well. A little 15 seconds of might make people a little awkward, but gives people a chance to speak up if they're a bit shy. Yes, Mason.
I just might propose potentially that we delay nominations until next meeting to just kind of mull this over a bit further.
So you would be proposing to delay nominations, right, of the chair or vice chair. However, we're still discussing whether the.
I'm just throwing it out there. I'm throwing it out there as a for discussion. I'm not moving to do that at this point.
I tend to agree that would be better.
It would definitely give us the opportunity to get to know each other, understand each other's skill sets, and get a sense for who is equipped for the situation. I think also would be good to wait.
In that case, we probably would want to have the next meeting soon, because that deadline, that initial deadline of end of June, is coming up fast.
do we need a chair before we establish subcommittees? Because we could have a science subcommittee up and running.
Well, we're pretty free. We're an advisory board, so we're not too stuck on procedure right now, and we're operating without bylaws, so it's a little bit like anarchy. But I think we can do what we want. We'll take a vote on any actions today. So yeah, we're open. I guess what I would do is I will make a motion to vote on whether we have a co-chair or a vice or a chair vice chair structure now.
Wouldn't it make more sense to decide whether we're going to delay first? I guess I would perhaps move to make that determination.
Okay. Sure. Oh, sorry, I was a little confused. I thought we were just delaying nominations for today, which that was fine. But we can delay making the decision on the structure as well. So
I guess I would just, just to discuss that. I guess I would just suggest that.
It's David, and in regard to nominations, I think we've already heard the chair is a lot of work. I don't know if people can nominate themselves. In my experience, you want people who are up to that position and willing to devote all that much extra work. I'm sure not all of us are. I don't think I am. So I think it would be great if people could nominate themselves and explain why they want to be the chair.
I think I agree with that. I think that's very helpful. Especially since it would take time
go ahead,
to truly get to know one another and nominate one another. I like that proposal, David.
I like it too, and I was even going to suggest that if you're interested in being the chair, leave your camera on, and if you're not, go dark.
The reason I think that's complicated is what if someone would like to be a co-chair? What are they? Those are two very different roles, whether you're going to be a co-chair or a chair. And so it might be beneficial to clarify that first. And I personally would prefer to delay it, but that's just my opinion. And so,
You're saying maybe the vote on chair, co-chair, why delay? I mean, we've had a discussion about it, and what else do we need to make the decision? It would be, I guess, my.
Well, let's vote on it. Let's vote on it then. So I'll move to delay until a later time.
Do I hear a second?
A second. You're seconding. I'm seconding. So we're deciding whether to vote to delay or not. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I second to vote on that.
Okay. So this is I'm gonna try to make this easy for Nick, who's recording our votes. And do we have a hand raise function that we all have access to? And I don't have to vote, so this is easy for me. And but I would say all in favor of delaying a decision on the co-chair or chair vice chair structure, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3.
Sorry, but I'd like to abstain. It doesn't really matter to me.
Okay, I'm not seeing enough votes to delay the decision on a structure of a chair and co-chair. And what I can do is, if everybody wants to make sure, I can go through the roll and just get a aye or a nay from everybody, if that's easier, if we are in agreement. Okay. Well, I'll go through the role. It's just easier.
Andre, real quick, something that has worked really well in CPOT, right, City of Portland's cannabis policy oversight team on Zoom, is to just ask if anybody is in opposition, right, or if anybody's abstaining. And if nobody is in opposition or abstaining, we just assume that everybody is in favor. And that just expedites the process and prevents you from having to roll call 16 members.
Thank you. Well spoken from a veteran chair. Anyone in opposition of delaying the decision on whether we have a chair, vice chair versus co-chair?
All right, so I'm sorry, I thought we just voted. Didn't we just vote on that?
Yeah. Okay. I was trying to get a clear indication of who voted for what, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that we're going to move forward with the vote on the structure.
What I was really proposing, though, was delaying the entire process, not specifically that distinction, but it's not that important. I just thought it would be easier to vote, but it made it more confusing.
And Mason, for the delay, what would be the idea? Like, what are you thinking in terms of helping inform during that time?
Oh, I guess, it just seems like a little bit rushed, in my opinion. But, I'm not tied to it. I'm not going to die on that hill or anything. I think I'm totally open. Whatever people want to do. I just thought it'd be easier to vote on it.
Okay, I'm not seeing too much consternation about the issue. So what we'll do is we'll table the discussion and bring it back to the next agenda on both nominations and how we're going to structure it.
Okay.
All right, there's always going to be some bumps in the first meeting, but I think we got that one down. So our next agenda item is our subcommittee structure. So we heard Jeff's comments at the beginning. I think we're going to have an equity subcommittee. So what I would like to do is just open the floor up for discussion on possible subcommittees. So if it comes to your mind, we'll write it down. And if we come out with like 20 subcommittees and we only have 17 members, then we can certainly whittle it down. So I will go ahead and propose an equity subcommittee, and then I'll open up the floor for any suggestions for additional subcommittees.
I will throw out training and education for both the facilitators and the people who will be producing.
And I suggest a licensing subcommittee for the psilocybin service centers and maybe the facilitators. I don't know if those should be separate or together.
I'd like to add manufacture and testing.
I would add research and evaluating the weight of research. One of my concerns is we all know all research isn't created equal, and concerned consumers sometimes can't distinguish between a quality study and a garbage study or a junk science study.
Would that fit within safety and efficacy, or would that be a separate committee?
I don't know. Most research relates to safety and efficacy.
I'm thinking that could be a committee that, that's part of what it's charged with when they evaluate the science and evidence. They take that into consideration.
But we're also providing research to the public. I thought that was one of the functions. And as I sit here this moment, my imagination isn't reaching non-safety and efficacy studies, but I'm willing to bet that there are some. But
I suppose it depends on the purpose of the committee. If safety and efficacy is establishing the evidence that's already been developed for the June 30th report, that's one discrete task that would end at a certain date. The other exciting role that I potentially see is building in rigorous evaluation tools into the implementation of Proposition 109 that would allow for subsequent safety and efficacy assessment within Oregon. Kind of two different tasks in my mind. I don't know what to call them.
And there is addition to safety and efficacy. I was actually contacted by a lawyer in the cannabis industry who was suggesting a clinical research study to help establish for the Oregon State Police what would be permissible levels of psilocybin in one's bloodstream. Maybe that falls within safety. And perhaps we'd even want to be making recommendation or areas of research or areas identifying what isn't known. I mean, sometimes saying we don't know is the best thing you can say.
I think that's critical, David, and one of the main tasks that'll come out of the initial evidence review.
I think start a research subcommittee that's just making general recommendations on what we research might be important, right? Because we need answers to questions around propagation and cultivation, as well as manufacturing and testing and public health and clinical, use and outcomes. There's just so much that falls under the umbrella of research, and I would hate for us to create subcommittees for each type of research effort. And maybe start with just a broad-based research subcommittee that helps us tease apart what discrete arenas of research we want to pay particular attention to. And at any given time, right? Timing and action is going to become important here. Where do we start in 4 years from now? What else should we be studying? Would be how I would frame that.
Yeah, I agree with Rachel that broad-based research committee makes sense. I really kind of want to redirect our attention a little bit back to what Sam had kind of foreshadowed earlier on, and that's the prioritizing the formation of a facilitator training subcommittee. And the reason why I want to just emphasize that is because myself and other leaders in the training program community I've actually thought long and hard about, the challenge of having practitioners ready for licensure in 2023. And the main takeaway is basically that in order to have licenses in 2023, which is a hard, fast deadline, we have to begin training programs this fall, which means that we need to start developing rules pretty much straight out of the gate so that they can be considered for the board to consider by the summer, I'd say. And so basically that's a really tight deadline or a tight timeline. And therefore I'd love to be able to kind of start there and make a motion to approve at least the formation of a training program subcommittee that can start work, pretty much right away.
Thanks, Tom. I'll hold that motion for 1 second. And I see Kevin has his virtual hand up, so I want to recognize Kevin, and then I'm going to go to Kim because I think she had a comment as well.
Yeah, hi, Kevin Fitz, a volunteer with the Oregon Mental Health Consumer Association. Our tagline is "Nothing about us without us," and I just want to point you, Pat Allen in a 2018 report stated there's 850,000 behavioral health consumers across the public and commercial spectrum. One of the things that we're always attempting to do is how does the product or the service that's put on the ground for behavioral health consumers, how is that arranged and set up for protections, informed consent, and value from the point of view of the consumers? And maybe it's not imperative immediately, but I sure love to have a greater discussion about the value of a consumer engagement committee of some sort. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Very good point. Kim, I'll go to you. You're on mute. I do it at least once or twice a day. Still on mute.
All right, third time's the charm. I was going to make a motion to see if Tom would take the position of chairing the committee on training and licensing. I think he's the best person for that position.
My discussion point would be, is that one committee, or is training one subcommittee and licensing as a separate subcommittee?
I would say they're separate, actually. Yeah, I think the training subcommittee is focused on curricula. It's focused on the administration of training programs. It's focused on the timeline to get training programs approved by the OHA to come into being and to be operating by this fall. So there's a good amount of work there. The good news is that we've got a great start on it. There's a lot of people thinking about that. And I think a training program subcommittee would come together really nicely and hit the ground running. And, again, I really see that as kind of the beating heart of this program at large. There's so many important aspects. You guys are bringing forward great thoughts about subcommittees in general, and there's lots of great discussion to have around all the angles of this detailed program. But I really think the training program is what's going to breed competence, and it's the timeline is such that just getting started on that would be well necessary, and I would love to take that role. I don't know when that opportunity is to accept that motion, if that's later on.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm still holding two motions now, and I'll recognize Steph and then David, and then we'll go back to our first motion, which was the creation of a training subcommittee.
So I'm still thinking about other subcommittees, and these could fall under issues that have already been discussed. But how do we educate not just the trainers, but how do we educate the public about what psilocybin is and continue to talk about it as we're developing all of the implementation processes? How do we talk about it? And particularly rural Oregon too, the rest of Oregon. And then I'd be interested in adding probably to the training, the screening tools that we're using. I think we really need to look at exactly how we're screening people in and out, or recommending their in or out. And then there's an opportunity for looking at, and Oregon's posed to collect an enormous amount of valuable data. How can we set ourselves up to start gathering information about what psilocybin doesn't do, benefits, risks? I mean, it's massive. So I think probably a subcommittee to discuss that too.
Thanks, Beth. Go ahead, David.
I appreciate the need to prioritize training, and the timeline is really difficult to meet and will be difficult to meet. My only concern is that training needs to be based on evidence and research. And if it's not going to be reliable. You can train people up, but if it's not an effective training that's reliable, that's relevant, it's not going to be worthwhile. So what I'm just asking, and my bias is toward evidence-based. I'll state my bias. I appreciate there's not going to be the evidence here because unfortunately research could not be performed when it should have been. So now we're stuck where we are. But that said, consumers, patients, whatever you want to call them, they put a lot of weight on someone being licensed, approved. And we have to make sure that's meaningful. It's not just a label. So we have to rely on research to do that.
I think that's the charge of the subcommittee. is that we're not reinventing the wheel here. There is a lot of work done on training facilitators and in the research and beyond, and it will be important for a subcommittee to gather that information, compile it, to show how the curriculum is based on evidence. And I think that's the work that needs to be done right away.
I want to recognize Todd.
Yeah, I would agree that this is maybe an overlap between an education committee and a research committee. There is actually a fair amount of evidence out there. That some of it is quite old, and all of that needs to be reviewed, I think, rigorously. And that these things can happen in parallel, and one activity can inform the other as things develop. And I like the idea, Tom, of really collating the educational programs that are existing. Those haven't been implemented haphazardly, typically. There is a lot that's already been done in this space, and we need to collate that information around education.
Thanks, Todd. Angela.
Thank you. Two things. One, I agree that evidence is necessary for guiding education and training programs, but I want to call into consideration what we would consider evidence. There are a lot of indigenous, non-Western ways of knowing around psilocybin therapy, around psychedelic use in general, and to leave those out of the conversation, those pieces of knowledge and information, would be very unfortunate. Just because it's not a double-blind randomized clinical, trial that is a Western model doesn't mean that that evidence is not incredibly useful and important pertaining to the use of psilocybin. So just wanting to make that comment, we need to expand what we consider valid evidence. And the other is, this might fit into a couple of other subcommittees, but I think that educating healthcare providers, therapists, doctors who are going to be interfacing with the people who are using psilocybin therapy, so that they know, for instance, how to help someone with a medication taper safely before they go in, and what medications are going to be safe for someone to use, how to advise them as a primary care provider how to be safe and mindful of the work that they're doing. And, there's one integration session included here, but psychedelic integration is a long-term process for most people. These physicians and therapists are going to be doing this work of integration with people long after the session is over. And I feel like having some basic training around working with folks who are going to engage in this program is important. That might fit in the education committee, that might fit in the community engagement committee. I'm not sure, but just more education for providers.
What if we call it one committee called education, and training is the first task of that education committee, and then public education and healthcare provider education are perhaps later tasks? That's just my suggestion.
I think the training, I think my feeling is the training programs are just full bandwidth. I think we need to, well, I suppose we could sequence, but I think that, I have some questions more generally about subcommittees that I don't know if this was established in any of the documents, but my hope is that these subcommittees can expand certainly beyond this board and bring in expertise, not only from Oregon, but from around the world. So I'm thinking in regard to this training program committee, there are great minds who have already done this work and they want to help. And I can help to mobilize that. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page in that regard, with regard to accessing knowledge globally?
Yeah, so generally with the subcommittee structure in a board like this is that you'll have co-chairs of the subcommittee, and those have to be board members. And then those co-chairs can invite other members to be then subcommittee members. They're not full members of the board, of course, but you can certainly pull in subject matter experts from whatever fields and areas that you want to contribute to the discussion. And then what happens is that the co-chairs of the subcommittee then bring their findings, reports, or recommendations to the full board, at the discretion of and coordination of the chair. And then there's discussion amongst the board members on that subcommittee recommendations and findings. So that was a long answer. Short answer is yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I also want to appreciate Angela's input there, that I think the committee should have diverse perspectives that kind of combine to establish best practice standards.
Andre, real quick, I know there are hands raised, but I agree. I want to second Angela's remarks. I threw out the term decolonization earlier, and decolonization is the unknowing that Western science, medicine knowledge, right, evidence is superior to traditional or natural, holistic science, medicine, knowledge, and wisdom. And so I appreciate those remarks because, yeah, in this space, especially around psilocybin, we have to recognize that there is a rich history of cultural knowledge, cultural science, cultural medicine that is actually evidence-based. There is actually a lot of research that has been done. It just doesn't necessarily meet the Western conventional model. So I do want to make sure that we are careful to attempt to the best of our ability to use decolonized language in this space. And certainly the Equity Committee will do our part to help educate our board around what that means and our greater community about what that means too.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll go to Mason and then Atir.
I really agree with Rachel's points. I wanted to draw attention to her comment about 4 subcommittees that might be important. And I think I agree with this breakdown of equity, training, research, and education. I do tend to think training and education should probably be separate because the more we're talking, I'm seeing that. I think people who participate in this program will often be stigmatized by their healthcare providers. I think that's an important role for the education committee to educate the public and healthcare providers. I just wanted to throw some support for those 4 subcommittees that Rachel mentioned.
Yeah, so I basically agree with what Mason just said. I think those 4 subcommittees identified are kind of cover a lot of at least the initial bases that I think strike me as most important. I do agree, I think, with Tom, for example. I think training, to me, the training and research subcommittees really got to get going very fast because they're kind of going to set the substrate, in my view. And I think when we think about research, I think it's sort of implying kind of what we know in terms of like what's in the scientific literature. But I 100% agree. I think part of the job of the board is going to be to integrate that with the sort of the intent of the measure, as Tom spoke about, and with what we know from other sort of sources of knowledge. But again, I emphasize, I think the training and research subcommittees probably have to kind of hit the ground running as soon as possible.
Go with Todd and then Tom.
You're muted.
You're on mute, Todd.
Thanks. I agree with the 4 committees that have been mentioned, and would wonder if a 5th might be appropriate as a quality of care committee. This is a more distal process that's going to grow out of the education and training and research committees. But at some point, we'll have to talk about standards of care, and maybe that's part of licensing. Maybe those 2 things track together, but I think there's a 5th committee lurking out there somewhere eventually.
Yeah, I might be adding to that. I want to put on the map and it was brought up screening in general, but I would maybe call it assessment. I think this is a super important piece that, again, a lot of thought has been kind of already contributed in regard to how are we going to ensure goodness of fit between providers and clients. Where does medical oversight come into play in terms of assessment and catching contraindications and medication stuff? And so we batted around the idea of establishing some kind of filter, in a sense, to match clients with providers, at least direct them toward lists of providers that could meet them where their needs are at, whether they're clinical needs or otherwise. And so that's kind of an evolving thought. And I think there's just a lot of thinking that needs to be done around assessment in particular and how it moves clients in the direction of care that really meets their needs. And then the question is that kind of pushed out into a central kind of assessment initial kind of filter, or is that done within service centers themselves? Certainly some assessment is done within service centers themselves, but does it make sense to add another layer? There's just a lot of discussion around that. So I'll just throw that out there, that I think that's something that we want to start to attend to earlier than later.
Thanks, Tom. I want to recognize Jessie. She's got her hand up.
Yeah, so I have a thought that I'd like to pose for the board to consider. I'm curious where manufacture and testing meets implementation of these therapies. And I think that an idea we should think carefully about is, are we talking about providing whole mushrooms or psilocybin extracts or synthetic psilocybin or a combination of those products? That would really guide a lot of the research that I would do, and also shape the thinking about safety and concerns in the clinic as these therapies are being administered.
Great points, Jesse. And it's something that came to my mind in early beginnings of reviewing this ballot measures. What are the types of products that we're going to allow as a state, whether it's whole natural products or some sort of synthetic or synthesized version of psilocybin. I want to recognize Rachel, and then I'm going to be wary of time. And I know we need to discuss the next topic and then our future meeting date. So I'm going to let Rachel provide some comments here. I'm going to close this discussion, and then we have a motion that's being held. And before I do that, after Rachel speaks and before we vote on the motion, I'll just add some perspective on subcommittees.
All right. Jesse, thank you for bringing that up again, because it jogged my memory too. Eventually we'll want to tackle things like business and law, and back to business, how the supply chain operates, how it flows, what are the economics of the entire industry that the psilocybin assisted therapy program is creating, right? That supply chain is a de facto industry. So what is that going to look like for all of the license holders, right? The operators, and how does that flow into the treatment arena as well? So we have to, consider the entire, what I like to call seed to outcome supply and demand circuit. And there's going to be a lot of thought, and we're probably going to have to rely on a lot of capacity building from our community and our networks to come in and talk about the economics of this industry and program that we're creating. And we have to be honest with ourselves about that this does create an industry. And so, how are we going to steward this industry with integrity? It's going to become a salient question.
Thanks, Rachel, for that perspective. I just want to say a couple of things about subcommittees, and from my experience with the Cannabis Commission, is that, I would caution us on getting too specific on the subject matter that any specific subcommittee that we want would handle, and that subcommittees really can handle a broad range of topics, and it's just all about organizing that and producing a timeline for when we would discuss or subcommittee would discuss a specific area. For example, the Cannabis Commission has a product safety subcommittee, and that product safety subcommittee deals with testing of products, what's appropriate laboratory testing for cannabis, in addition to forms, of the product, whether it's full flower, extracts, edibles, etc. And then also looking at, sorry, I lost my train of thought on the third point, but I hope that you get my point, is that, we can have a subcommittee named, product safety, and then we're looking at other aspects in a broader sense rather than trying to narrow down a specific area. So I just kind of some food for thought there. For example, a research subcommittee would look at not only the task that the board has for June 30th and LHA has for July 31st, but then, how do we synthesize future research that comes in? How do we, would we issue or permit research on psilocybin within the state? So, these are things that the subcommittee can tackle, and just not, we don't have to be so specific and so myopic in the topics that each subcommittee is going to tackle, and we'll just try to keep them broad, but specific enough to that area that we want to address. So that was kind of my inarticulate input on that. So we have one motion that's sitting out there, and it is a motion to form a facilitator training subcommittee. I will go ahead and second that motion. And then what I will do is just ask anyone that's opposed to the idea of this subcommittee and raise their hand or say that they're opposed. Okay, seeing no opposition, I would say that we now have the creation of a facilitator training subcommittee, and we can certainly broaden that to other trainings for other individuals in the future as well. And I'm going to go ahead and just full agency kind of hierarchy and just say we're going to have an equity subcommittee too. We don't need to discuss that any further. All right, I think I have a list of several subcommittees. I've got a smaller kind of 4 or 5 subcommittee list. I'll put those all on paper and bring them back for the next meeting for discussion. I think a lot of these discussions and the votes that occur are going to go a lot smoother once we have a chair to kind of help guide the direction of the board. So I was not expecting this robust of a conversation on subcommittees. So pleasantly surprised by the discussion and the interest in formation of the topics that we're going to consider. So thank you all for that. Makes my job easier, not trying to fill up dead space.
Don't we have a second motion hanging? Because I was going to second Kim's motion. I was going to second Kim's nomination of Tom to be the chair of that new subcommittee.
Thank you for reminding me, Barb. Yes, and that's a second for Tom, the chair of the subcommittee on training. So I'll do it the same way. Any opposition to the motion to have Tom chair the subcommittee on training?
I have a question. What is the role of subcommittee chairs? Is it the equivalent of the committee chair, or is it just, how much authority does the subcommittee chair have?
I think they set the direction on the conversations and the topics that the subcommittee is going to be tasked with dealing with. They work with the agency on setting those meetings, having a subcommittee agenda, and then moving through that agenda at a subcommittee meeting.
Andre, if I may, I think it might be appropriate to say that subcommittees don't have authority, right? Subcommittees are fact-finding engines. They're a way that this board will increase capacity to bring in insights that are very important to us and don't want to miss. But any recommendations coming through the subcommittees will fall on the board, to vet, appraise, provide feedback for, and ultimately approve.
Right.
Does that help out, David?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the last comment, because these are very important issues, and obviously subcommittees can become the experts for the full group, but will require, I think should require, a group consensus, a full group consensus.
And Andre,
Right,
that is how it works, right? We bring something to the table and then it's voted on by the advisory board, right?
Right. So subcommittee chair would bring like a report from the subcommittee meeting and say, hey, subcommittee discussed whole mushroom use, whatever, and here's our recommendations on whole mushroom use. And then the chair will invite a discussion for the full board, and then, we either accept or reject the recommendations from the subcommittee. So we still have the second motion on Tom chairing. I haven't heard any opposition, so speak now or forever hold your peace for at least 1 year. All right. So moved.
I was just going to say, for the record, this is Tom Eckert we're voting on, not me.
Yes, thank you. Two Toms. I'll try my best to make the distinction. And for the record, that is that's Tom Eckert, not Dr. Tom Jean. That will be the chair of that subcommittee. Okay, so our last kind of action item for discussion today, it's 3:30, so I'll let this kind of go for about 25 minutes, and I do want to reserve 5 minutes to talk about our next meeting date. Before I jump into that, it looks like Todd, you had something that you wanted to say.
I just was hearing a fair amount of consensus around the need for a research committee. Shall we vote on that now?
Do you hear a motion?
I second.
I second that, yeah.
Okay, anyone opposed to a research subcommittee? All right, hearing none, so moved. And now there is a research subcommittee for the Psilocybin Advisory Board. Thank you, Todd. Gosh, this mute button is going to kill me. I'm going to share my screen briefly and let you guys look at a section of the ballot measure for our next topic, and we'll look at the language here. So can everybody see my shared screen? So if we're looking at section 11, subsection 3, on or before June 30th, 2021, and from time to time after such date, the board shall submit its findings and recommendations to OHA on available medical, psychological, and scientific studies, research, and other information relating to the safety and efficacy of psilocybin in treating mental health conditions, including but not limited to addiction, depression, anxiety disorders, and end-of-life psychological distress. And then the action for the board to submit its findings by June 30th. Oh, no, sorry, that's section 4. Anyway, June 30th, 2021. So that's the language of the first task of the board. So what I want to do now is open up some discussion on this particular section, what that means to people, kind of the universe of literature that's out there. And I would like to reiterate that it is very specific to psilocybin. So I would propose that we are not talking about producing literature related to other psychedelics. You know, there's some leeway in that if there's a a paper, a published paper out there that deals with multiple subjects and there's a specific psilocybin section, then yes, so be it. Let's list that as well. But to kind of concentrate the direction on psilocybin. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is that a mispronunciation of the term? Okay, no, thank you. All right, thanks.
Some people do say psilocybin, but it seems like most of us are saying psilocybin.
Okay. All right, so I'll just open it for discussion, and I'll try to recognize people as they raise their hands or as they speak up. And I see Atir, oh, he's got a thumbs up, not a hand up. I'll start with Tom.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Tom,
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, as the author of that clause in the language, I did not intend that to be kind of an oppressive deadline. I know that folks at OHSU have a specific kind of and probably accurate idea of what it means to do a full research overview. We were just thinking that we wanted to get some information to the public. And I think that clause can be used to our advantage to develop a body of research to support our efforts. But at the same time, I'm weary that it becomes inhibiting of the real work we need to be doing. So I want to just kind of be mindful of that this was never meant to be a terribly oppressive deadline where we have to focus all our energy on something. So I think perhaps we can, and this is open for discussion, but like to gauge our expectations as to what it means to forward something to the public and make sure that we're doing that in alignment with getting everything else we need to get done and kind of striking the right balance there.
You know, I would like to see the wording again, but it's sort of like my first hearing it the first couple of times. It seems like there's space for a well-informed, but not like fully polished, like publication, peer-reviewed type product. And I think so. Let's see. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you could imagine, generating a, basic sort of interim summary of what the literature says in terms of safety or efficacy. Okay. So distribute to the public. Okay. So that sounds like.
And I just to let people know what I just did there. I just highlighted the action that the agency has to take by July 31st. So once we get the recommendations, then OHA has to publish and distribute this information, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thoughts that come to my mind are, number one, there is an established literature, but it's not like enormous, it's not an enormous literature in terms of the key things that we're interested in with respect to safety and efficacy. So I think it is a tackleable topic. And the only other point that I would make, on top of what Andre said in terms of focusing on psilocybin, I think it's important that we're really focused on psilocybin, but I would also say that, psilocybin acts at, a serotonin receptor that other psychedelic drugs act at. And so some of that research is going to be relevant on a case-by-case basis. And so some of, I think, what will be summarized will also be related to, other chemicals which help inform safety and efficacy of psilocybin.
My comment here is that it's important, whatever we do, to be balanced and comprehensive. Maybe it's because I've had to deal with so many deceptive drug companies who selectively present their positive research and fail to mention what they don't like. Anything that's produced will be scrutinized. So if it's going to be done, it has to be done well. That's my 2 cents.
I would just add to that and stress the importance of generating a product that's going to stand up outside of Oregon under scientific scrutiny. And I agree with Thayer that this may not be as big of a task as it could be potentially. On my own quick search, I think there are only 3 systematic reviews currently, formal systematic reviews on psilocybin that we could draw from, and then about a half a dozen narrative reviews, which are of lower scientific rigor, but can contribute a lot in a short period of time. I wonder if it would be worthwhile turning to groups, organizations, people who do this for a living and could rapidly turn around something. I don't know if there are funds for that, but we're on a deadline, and I think it's worth investing in quality.
I agree.
On a recent project that I was involved in funding was putting together opioid best practices. And we used a group up at OHSU to do the evidence-based review and to rank the research. And, they just had a couple of different ratings, but that could assess the strength of the evidence in a way that was accessible to laymen.
So first I want to address Todd's question on funding for a literature review. Probably not before June 30th. Just the fiscal biennium. And if we have some leeway with time, as Tom is saying that we probably do, we could do a certain amount by June 30th and make that available on OHU's website. And then, as the ballot measure indicates, from time to time after the date, we go back and reevaluate the research, add additional literature, et cetera. So that's all possibilities, and I think we have a lot of flexibility here. Secondly, what I'm hearing now is starting a discussion around the parameters of what we would make available and publish. So I think that's certainly doable. There are already some parameters in the language, so it has to relate to safety and efficacy, right? And then and for example, I'm not proposing this at all. I'm just saying, for example, if you want to say, okay, we want to just look at peer-reviewed research or these other types of publications, then we can certainly propose that and do so. And I know that, peer-reviewed research would limit some of the stuff that we would want to put out there, but then we could name or describe the non-peer-reviewed type of literature that's available that we would like to put up on our website. Go ahead, Tom. And if I don't get to you and you don't see anyone else raising their hand, start talking. And you're on mute. Mute button.
Sorry about that. Yeah, to the group, do we want to get a chair going to, do we need a chair to start this project? Is that the way committees essentially work? Maybe that's a question for Andre.
I was going to propose some homework on this assignment for the next meeting. But if we want to kind of designate someone to kind of lead that assignment now as the chair of, I guess we could call this this is the research subcommittee work at this point, then we can certainly do that.
Well, I'd be interested to know who's interested in taking that. I think Todd's would be a great choice. And if that's something you're interested in heading up, I'm interested in nominating. You there, Todd?
I was thinking.
I know, it's a tough one.
It sounds like the committee, the board has a lot of leeway in terms of bringing in help from other sources, funded or not. Is that right? If that's the case, I'd be happy to do that. but I'd want to bring in other
I'd be happy
experts.
to help you. I'd be happy to help you with all of that.
That seems like.
And to clarify, we have permission to contact people at Johns Hopkins or wherever, right?
And I'd be happy to help with that effort as well.
So I'm hearing a research subcommittee forming before my eyes.
It's amazing.
And I want to recognize Angela. She's got her hand up.
Well, that was one of my comments, was that, you know, this is something we have 90 days to do, so we should get chopping on it. So I am suggesting that we get the subcommittee formed and get started working with each other before the next meeting. The second piece, oh, I might have to come back to you with that. No, there it is. It was a question pertaining to whether the OHA will seek to publish the information in a journal of some kind, or will just hold the information on their website. Are we looking to publish in some journal?
So for my kind of idea, without, you know, this is my own thoughts, is that, you know, this wasn't going to be a literature review per se. I think if that is something that we want to pursue, then we can go that way. We can go that route. We could also just list a bibliography or an annotated bibliography on the website and provide links to the available literature, similar to what Johns Hopkins Center for the Human Consciousness and Psychedelics does. Like if you go to their publications tab, they list all the publications of their the people involved in that research center, and it's more like a list, a bibliography list. So I was thinking of that, you know, something like that, but of course they're just my thoughts.
Well, if I throw this in there for consideration, this entire process, these 2 years and, you know, the 4 years of our term is likely publishable. So, you know, framing our work within that, number one. Number two, recognizing this amazing opportunity at our fingertips here to set up an IRB around our treatment centers, and recognize that this program is a research project in and of itself. So to think about the things that we need to do to set that in motion, such that, you know, January 1, 2023, a real live observational study begins to take place.
And I want to I have sorry, go ahead. Huh? Get a drink? Sure.
I
have a procedural question.
Sorry, Bob. I just want to remind the public to please mute their phone. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know
ahead,
if this is a procedural question or an etiquette question, or maybe I just emailed Todd the suggestion, but I have a suggestion to serve on the research subcommittee. And he told me he applied to serve on the board, but he lives in Washington State because he's a physician at UW, and he's done a lot of research. And so I just don't know the correct way. Do I email Todd and say, here's his contact information? And he said he'd be happy to help. He was disappointed to not be selected, but because he doesn't live in Oregon, he realized it made sense. So anyway, I just don't know how to, you know, so, it should be actually the research committee it's Dr. Tony Bach. I don't know if some of you know him at UW. He's the co-chair of the Center for Excellence in Palliative Care there. And he's an oncologist by background and a huge proponent of psilocybin therapy.
Thanks, Barb. So just for procedure wise, we would form the committee, we would select co-chairs of the subcommittee, and then those co-chairs can then inform the agency of, hey, here are the people that we want to invite. And then the agency will reach out to those people with an email saying, hey, you know, the board would like to invite you to participate on this particular subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we have a motion out there on Todd Athir and Ollie co-chairing a subcommittee on research.
I don't need to throw myself in as the chair, but I'd be happy to assist.
So we at least have 4 research subcommittee members.
And this is,
we can.
I'd happy to be serving too as well, Andre.
5. Okay, I'll close it out at 6 if there's anyone else that wants to join. Just
And
we can start there, and we can always take more members later, you know. All right. So any opposition to that membership at this point in time? All right. Hearing none. So moved, and we have research subcommittee membership right as of now. Just for the record, Todd Korthus, Athir Abbas, Ali Hamadeh, and Angela Carter, and Dr. Tom Jean. And then we can always adjust membership later, you know, subsequent meetings. All right, so if we want to talk about kind of this homework assignment, or if we want to assign ourselves some homework for the next meeting related to this task, I'm going to open that conversation up. And I see that Steph has got their hand up, so I'll recognize her.
I just wasn't sure if and how I'd like to volunteer for the Education and Training Subcommittee. Sorry, I'm a little off task, but it looked like that was happening for research. So are we volunteering?
Yeah. And maybe Andre, could you speak to a little more about committee formation and how this happens in the meeting? Like, do we vote on membership within the, any insight would be great.
Well, since we kind of held off on the co-chair decision, I think that we need to bring, like, besides the 2 subcommittees that we already voted for today, which is training and research, I think that we should bring the remaining list of possible subcommittees back for the next meeting for discussion. We can narrow those down and vote on them, and then we can discuss membership in each of those other subcommittees, if that sounds okay to everybody.
Does that allow for us to get started, essentially? Like, do we need the membership identified to be working together? Is there a formality around that? Or, for example, I want to talk with Kim more about and Stephanie about this.
What didn't happen today, and what will happen probably at the next meeting, I'll have to talk to Shannon, is that there are some rules around communication between public bodies and membership of public bodies that occur outside of public meetings. Generally, you can't, in your capacity as members, do that sort of communication. The reasoning there is that public meeting law, and we want everything and all discussion and decisions of boards to be out in the public. So, you know, the 2 subcommittees that we've created today can certainly schedule a time to meet, and that it would also be a public meeting. So it'd have to be noticed appropriately. An agenda would have to be put out. For now, those subcommittees can work with me in my role as OHA administrator to get that set up. So there's some formalities related to public meeting law that we'll need to work around to make sure that we're doing everything transparently and in view of the public.
Is there any reason why Kim and Stephanie can't be made members of the training program subcommittee? Is there a reason why we're?
We should vote on it.
They are on it.
We could vote on it today. We could vote on it today.
Okay.
If that's something that we would like to do.
Can I be a keener and add myself to that group too?
Angela, I'm about to nominate you to be my co-chair. I do need one. on the.
Okay. I have a lot of availability, so.
So Kim's got her hand up, but I want to back up for a second. We're kind of off the agenda discussion. We're not really talking about the literature topic anymore. We're talking about a training subcommittee, which is in existence, but now we're talking about membership on that training subcommittee. Thank you for trying to keep things in track in my mind. Okay, and the motion was for was Angela and who else to be on the training subcommittee? Steph, Bars, and Kim Galetz. So Nick,
I have
for
a
the
quick
record,
question.
and since we're
I have a
recording,
quick question though. Did we decide that this committee handles licensing? That's a separate. That's going to be handled by a separate committee, right?
That's a great question, and because that's the one I want to serve on.
Me too.
So right now, licensing would be a separate subcommittee, and we're just talking about the training of facilitators, like what the qualifications we would want them to have in order to provide those services. Okay, so that's that motion. I'll let Kim. Can I let Kim go, and then I'll go back to you, Tom.
I was just going to suggest that if we could vote for the training committee, we could meet and we could start getting going on things that need to get done and help Tom.
Which brings me to my next question. There are people, as I mentioned earlier, outside of the advisory board here that are, very helpful and very involved. What is the procedure for bringing people in to committee from outside of the advisory board? Is it just drawing on their help, or is it formal? Or again,
it's going to be a little informal, but there's going to be some like a formal kind of email. So once we get the membership of this subcommittee, I'm assuming you're the chair at this. Then you can just say, hey, Andre, I'd like to invite so and so. Here's their contact information. I would then email and say, hey, you've been invited by Tom to be on this subcommittee for the Psilocybin Advisory Board.
Great.
That works. Rachel.
Point of clarification, Andre, please. We're discussing advisory board membership on these subcommittees. Does that mean that those of us who have not requested to be on these subcommittees cannot attend these meetings to learn about what's being, okay. Right, so we're talking about formal,
it's a public meeting anyway, yeah.
Okay.
If you're not invited, I'll invite you.
Thanks, Andre.
And Kim, you still have your hands up. I don't know if you had another question or anything. Okay. All right, so, and Todd, you now have your hand up. Okay, so go ahead, Todd.
I'm sorry, I was waiting. I think Kim was in line ahead of me. Okay, I just wanted to chime in very quickly about diversity of perspectives on these committees, and just emphasize for this research subcommittee, we seem a little weighted in terms of gender, and so I'm actively soliciting volunteers, and I'll just say it, I would love to have a mycologist perspective on that committee.
Love to join the research committee.
Thank you.
Andre knows I also have a tendency to want to join everything. That's why I haven't said anything. But also, as I identify BIPOC in each of these arenas, I will probably be asking co-chairs to invite them into your spaces too.
Please, thank you.
Just a point of clarification, so I was sort of waiting to see what the subcommittees are before committing to too many of them. or to see where my skill set and expertise fits the best. So if we don't get on a committee now, is it that we're going to move on later, or the conversation will continue in our next meeting?
This subcommittee conversation will continue indefinitely.
Okay.
And membership can fluctuate, and it's just a matter of like bringing it forth to the board and getting an okay from the chair and the rest of the board. So yeah, we can, certainly nothing's in stone as far as membership, and you can always add people later.
Got it.
Okay, so we have a motion for those formally mentioned members. Any opposition? All right, hearing none. Now membership is at this point formed going forward for their training subcommittee. So we have 2 minutes left. I want to respect everybody's time, and I wanted to talk about our future meeting schedule. When I was conducting interviews with Jeff, I mentioned that we were going to the board would be meeting monthly, and I'm going to keep that schedule. The requirement is to at least meet every other month for the first 2 years, but I think that with the amount of work in front of us that we can do once a month, I would ask that we don't do more than once a month. That's what we have subcommittees for, to meet at their kind of decided schedule moving forward. And if subcommittees do plan on meeting, we do need to notice those meetings at least a week ahead of time. So please let me know what those dates would be. And then we'll try to get invites set up. Like I said, it's just Nick and I like kind of administering the board right now until I can get some people hired. So please be merciful on us. We both do have lots of other things going on in our portfolios. So just appreciate the consideration. And look, we're all here for 4 years, and we got 2-year development period, so we don't need to get it all done by May. That being said, I think that we need an April meeting. I would propose that we keep it in the last week of each month. That makes things predictable. I know that people had preferences on days of the week. I picked today and this time because it was simply the most people selected this time period as that they were available. I am not stuck on a particular day of the week or time. I will make that time and adjust my schedule for this board for the last week of each month as needed. So, I don't really think that we probably need to get into a big discussion on who's available what days, and that the most efficient and effective way to do that is with a doodle poll. However, I know that all of us have, most of us have day jobs that keep us very busy. And I know that the middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, sometimes are hard for the majority of people to make meetings. So maybe we consider Mondays or Fridays or what have you. But I think what I will see is I'll see that from the doodle poll on your availability. For those members, if we do pick a day and a time that really just doesn't work for you, let me know. And I will try to be as accommodating as possible, but it's just difficult with 17 people and trying to find times that work for all of us. So my commitment to you guys is really super majority rules here on setting the meeting schedule. And we don't really have any attendance requirements in the bylaws right now. So if you can't make meetings because your schedule doesn't permit you, then you're excused, and we'll try to get you caught up with minutes and recordings. That sounds good to anybody. Anyone have any comments or questions about setting future meeting dates? Angela, I think your hand is up.
Would you be willing to send us out a contact roster for board members so that we can reach out to each other and start the communication process?
You'll get I mean, you can see your emails and the emails that we send, but I would, this it's kind of a hard thing. Communicating about board business between board members outside of a public meeting is kind of a no-no. So I would use the doodle poll is probably going to be the best for establishing subcommittee meetings and and full board meetings.
And who will send out the doodle poll for making those happen?
Nick will do it.
Okay. Okay.
So I would say that the chairs of the two subcommittees get in touch with Nick for dates that they're thinking about, proposed dates, and then we'll get the subcommittee members some doodle polling around those particular dates, if that sounds okay. Just trying to keep everything kosher and transparent as far as our business.
Andre, correct me if I'm wrong, and if Shannon's here as well. My understanding was that we can communicate with one another, although all of it is subject to records requests. So it's all considered a public record. No?
So not in your capacity as board members, don't communicate about board business with each other.
Well, board business being one thing, but communicating, trying to coordinate, would that be considered different or the same?
No, just let OHA take care of the scheduling.
Okay,
and that's why we have the chairs, and the chairs can work with the agency on getting that set up. Okay,
great. Second question was, I think it might be in the bylaws, but to the degree that we can anticipate voting, so that we can prioritize being at meetings if there is a conflict to participate in that vote. Would be helpful.
So I will, for the meeting today, we had action items with asterisk next to the agenda topics. That will signify if there's a potential vote on a topic or not.
And I would like to make a motion for Angela to be a co-chair of the equity committee before we close here, so we can get to work as well.
I could do that.
Second that motion. Any opposition? All right, hearing none. Great. Angela and Rachel Knox, co-chairs of the equity subcommittee. All right, I think we got a lot discussed today. It was a really full meeting. We're over by about 5 minutes. Thank you to everybody that could make the meeting today. Really appreciate it. Great discussion, and look forward to seeing you all in about a month. And I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.